Hello. In this recording from our Justia webinar, Future Ready Leadership, How You Can Learn to Be Agile in the Legal Profession, Scott Mason shares actionable insights on embracing agility, adapting to client demands, and unlocking opportunities in evolving legal landscapes to stay competitive and forward-thinking. Remember, if you want to see more Justia videos on law practice and legal marketing, be sure to subscribe to our channel.
Hello, everybody. Happy 2025. As Nina said, my name is Scott Mason, and I am absolutely ecstatic to be back before the Justia family and talking to us about, as Nina mentioned, how you can learn to be agile in the legal profession. Learning how to be agile is one of the most important leadership skills that any lawyer can have. It can also be one of the most challenging, and that's why I feel it's so important to be able to share what I have to share with you today. So why don't we just dive right in? And we're going to start by talking about why this course matters so much. This course matters because of a situation that I have decided to call the agility conundrum, and it is one faced by lawyers who are stepping into leadership positions, whether of their own firm in a larger business environment or within larger non-legal organizations. And let me start by explaining what this agility conundrum really is. The success of many lawyers today exists within, and especially in the early phases of their career, within a space dominated by being able to manage the mechanics of practicing the law itself. And the mechanics of practicing the law that I'm talking about here relate to the fundamental things that make you a sole contributor that is of enormous success within any legal or non-legal organization as an attorney. For instance, contractor lease review, regulatory or legislative work, in-house advisement, even trial work. This sort of bread and butter legal work usually requires nuanced, intentional, deliberative thinking with careful attention to the details that you are applying the law to vis-a-vis the facts of the situation that your client is in. It also requires accommodating the client's desire to avoid litigation and the associated costs, as well as most times reputational and PR damage that can come with the sorts of things that lead to negative lawsuit, litigation, and other legal outcomes. And finally, success as a practitioner of law usually involves providing counsel that is both honest and accurate. On the other hand, leadership, whether as the head of a growth-oriented law firm or legal leadership within a non-legal organization, requires a significantly different skill set, whether you're a lawyer or not. First of all, it requires working with clients who expect fast decisions, because in a business environment, losing momentum can mean lost opportunity, whether that lost opportunity is to other potential partners that the client may work with, or due to shifting larger scale economic or social trends within which that business operates. It also requires a business-based mindset in order to ensure that the firm or the organization that you're working for grows. And if you are working within a non-legal organization as a legal advisor, it requires to be an effective lawyer leader within that context, the ability to serve as a trusted partner within the executive decision-making process. In other words, it requires that you be someone that people feel is on the same team and behind the direction that the organization is looking to move into, even as and especially when the situation that the business is in is shifting dramatically, as opposed to, which is a trap I fell in early in my leadership career, and I've seen other lawyers fall into, simply being the voice of no. And that's happening if people turn to you, like the CEO of a company that you're working for, and say, okay, Scott, tell us all the reasons why we can't do this, or something like that. That indicates that you are probably being seen as the voice of no, and you're not seen as a true leadership partner when it comes to driving the organization that you're working for to success. And then finally, as has been hinted at earlier, but I'll just make more explicit here, executive leadership or law firm leadership as a business matter requires addressing ever-shifting external environments quickly and based on information that changes rapidly or is evolving, sometimes on an hour-to-hour or day-to-day basis. If you step into a role as a lawyer leader and you have not developed new skills to match your new professional circumstances and the new role that you're in, things like career derailment, damage to your own reputation, and more can become inevitable. What does this look like? The conflict between legal imperatives that we develop early in our career as practitioners and the client's business needs that we need to be more attuned to as we step into leadership roles, especially at the executive level, can cause the perception of you as a lawyer and or your team, if you have a staff of lawyers underneath you, being overly rigid. That in turn can lead to a loss of credibility or the perception that you or your team are over lawyering matters and slowing things down or creating hindrances. When either of those developments occur as a matter of perception about you, then you will be quite quickly excluded from core decision making. And you see that, I've seen it more times than I would like to admit. The general counsel finds out about a major set of decisions that have significant legal implications only after the decisions have been made and everything is in place. Why? Because on some level or another, that general counsel has been perceived as someone who is not a credible decision-making partner. And because of that exclusion from the decision-making process, the client ends up incurring additional legal risk, additional expense when all of the legal whatnots have occurred that are negative, that could have simply been avoided if the trust had existed between the lawyer as a leader and the leadership of that organization, or if the agility necessary to drive leadership decisions, if it is a firm that that lawyer is ahead of, had all been in place right up front. So that takes us to the next big question here, which is, who exactly is this course for now that you know that it matters? One, it is lawyers seeking to build their own legal business within a larger business space. Because if you have a law firm that is seeking to provide counsel to business entities of any sort, you have to be able to operate within the same framework and within lockstep with how your clients are looking to move forward as a matter of their own business growth. It's also for in-house counsel who are seeking to move into leadership roles, particularly into chief legal officer type roles. As an ancillary matter, if you are in leadership roles that are not legal, a lot of this stuff will still apply, although this is more targeted to people who are looking to be chief legal officers or other similar high-level in-house counsel roles. And finally, this class and this seminar is here for anyone, whoever is just saying to themselves, you know what, I am a lawyer, I'm a great lawyer, but I know I'm overly risk-averse. I know I'm afraid of change, and it's something that I want to change. If that is a headspace that you are in without even really needing to, good for you. This class will help. Before we go any further, Nina said a little bit about me earlier, and I'm sure you can read more about me in my bio, but I'd like to just give a brief introduction as to who I am. I work with lawyers and leaders who are looking to maximize their impact, experience professional rebirth as leaders, and connect to their powerhouse voice so that they can elevate and escalate their career, and as Nina mentioned earlier, have a future that's epic. And by the way, if you want to have an epic future, you're going to have to be able to ride the waves as they come. And agility is therefore an absolutely crucial career tool to be able to develop and be able to maximize your impact and succeed and professionally that way. So let's briefly go through the agenda, then we'll get into the actual heart of our conversation today. First, we're going to talk about developing a more agile mindset. The lack of agility and an extreme aversion to risk ultimately have their roots up here. So we're going to want to examine that and figure out how you can begin to shift that mindset. Then we're going to talk about moving a mindset shift into real life. And we're going to do that by identifying 5 key leadership skills that lawyers frequently want to hone in on as developmental matters when it comes to buoying their ability to be agile. And then we're going to talk about some of the practicalities as to what an actionable plan looks like that can take you from where you are today to where you want to be. Finally, agility is a wonderful thing to be, but there is such thing as being too agile. And so we want to really understand the limits of adaptability, including ethical considerations. And we're going to talk a little bit about the ABA's model code as we discuss all of that. And then finally, I will go through the key takeaways and be able to move us all into a direction where we're able to put everything that you've heard today together and either formulate some questions for me later or take it with you to roll with and see your career just jet forward. So let's begin by talking about how you can develop a more agile mindset and feel when it comes to agility just like she does. The first thing that I want to talk about is the concept of professional narrative. The concept of professional narrative. The professional narratives that we tell ourselves, the stories that we believe inside and that we've framed, that identify who and what we are and where we're going in this world, they can either drive us toward success or away from it. Especially, they will drive you away from success if the narratives that you tell yourself about who and what you are and what your career is do not align with the role that you have or are stepping into, or if we do what's going to form the heart of this part of the discussion, if you confuse role and identity. This is some heavy stuff, but it is truly transformative if you take it in, and it's something that has changed my life and changed the lives of clients that I've worked with, and so I'm always excited to share it with other folks. So, for the purposes of this discussion, when I refer to a professional narrative, as I said a few minutes ago, the narrative that we're talking about is the story that we tell ourselves about our career trajectory. And your professional narrative always includes at least one character. That character is you. Now, if you don't believe you're a character in your own professional narrative, that's a whole different set of discussions that we should have. But almost every lawyer understands that the professional narrative that they have about their own lives has them as a central character. And as with all narratives, the professional narrative that you tell yourself consists of a series of events with sequential impact. In other words, the events in the past accrete and impact each other, and as an aggregate impact the stage of the narrative that is represented by our understanding of today, right now. And how we understand and frame the narrative and describe the narrative about what we are and our life, what our life is right now, will impact ultimately where we drive our narrative in the future. How you frame your professional narrative, therefore, impacts its outcome. If, for instance, you have framed your entire past as one defined by failure and getting F's in every single class that you do or class that you take, and that you just are a general screw up who manages to blow up everything that you touch, well, the chances are then that with that as your narrative, your career in the future will likely consist of a lot of screw ups and a lot of things not happening the way you want them to. And on the other hand, I'm sort of or taking that a little bit further. If your professional narrative is one that is defined by constant success, and you view yourself now as a success, you're more likely to enter into new situations with confidence, which, of course, as we all know, breeds even greater and greater and greater success. Going a little bit more nuanced here, if your professional narrative frames your relationship to risk, change, and the speed of response as defined by inflexibility, caution, or resistance to shifts in life, you will, in time, become exactly what your narrative says you are: inflexible, averse to risk, not able to adapt. Moreover, if you frame the narrative itself as unchangeable, your role within that narrative will be passive. In other words, it's one thing to say, I am, as a narrative matter, someone who has always been, always is, and now always will be resistant to change. That is having a narrative that shows a lack of agility in its structure. But then as a meta matter, you might also say, in addition to having a narrative that says, I don't change and I can't change, I have no power to control the narrative, even if I wanted to. And so both as a meta matter and as a matter of what is within this particular narrative you're telling yourself, to the extent that resistance to change or inflexibility or caution, particularly an excess of caution, are defining characteristics, you're ultimately not going to be able to carve out a narrative for yourself that is one that can lead you to sort of leadership success, that a world that is increasingly dominated by rapid, quick, dramatic change requires you to be. As fundamental to the professional narrative arc that you tell yourself is another element of self-perception, and that is your identity. The relationship of the narrative arc to the identity that we have as individuals outside of a story is best summed by the following question: are you confusing, or are you conflating the role that you have in your professional narrative with your underlying identity as a human being? Reflexively, many of us might say, of course not. I understand I am not just a lawyer. We say that, but particularly in American culture, and particularly within cultures like those of the law, where the jobs that we find ourselves engaged in tend to be extremely all-consuming. And when we are, and within the culture that we have, that on top of that, tends to categorize people by what their day-to-day job is, on a more subconscious level, many times we do confuse our role with our identity. And some proof in the pudding as follows: when people ask you to tell them about yourself, like let's say in a job interview, or just someone you randomly meet, if you start by saying, I'm an attorney, on some level, you are connecting your identity to your role. And in fact, I would say you're probably conflating it, because you're putting that role that you're in above and beyond everything else in your life. If you habitually find yourself saying, I can't do XYZ, or I should be XYZ, or the way ABC people sort of behave, and that's how I behave, and the model that you're or the box that you are putting yourself within includes words like lawyer, general counsel, CEO, law firm owner, partner, associate, blah, all these sorts of things, the chances are on some level you are conflating role with identity. A role is merely what you are doing at any point in time during the phase of your life that you are engaged professionally. Right now, my role is as CL or Justia seminar instructor. Other days, my role might be coach for lawyers. But that's just a function that I am playing during any particular point in time. The identity that we have includes the role, but is actually much broader and infinitely more multidimensional. And it includes continuity. So your identity includes who you were as a child and traumas that you might have had as a child or good times that you might have had as a child. It includes affiliations. It includes your core characteristics that may or may not have anything to do with the role that you have. It includes your connection to your family. It includes your spirituality, or if you have no spirituality at all, it includes that. It includes a whole host of things. In the supplemental materials, I have included a link to a very interesting article about exactly what identity is. I recommend that anyone that's intrigued by really thinking about, well, what makes me who and what I am, on a more metaphysical or deeper psychological level, to take a look at the article that I included there. It's actually quite interesting. But getting back to the core point of this discussion today, confusion of role with identity can lead to a whole variety of personal and professional challenges. For example, if you believe you are your professional role and that professional role disappears, you get laid off, or your company shuts down, or you retire, or you get fired, you can have a major identity crisis. There was an organization that I worked for that was massive, and it had tended to have a lot of people that were in this organization for their entire career, and they defined themselves by their affiliation and their roles within that company. And all the time with this entity, when they retired, they would die within 6 months. No, that didn't happen to everyone, but it happened a lot. And why did that happen? I would submit to you that it's because without their role, which had been tied too closely to their identity, they had no identity at all. Therefore, no reason to live. And again, I've included in the supplemental materials a very, very interesting discussion about this from the Harvard Business Review called "When Your Job is Your Identity, Professional Failure Hurts Even More." There is one more reason to be conscious about your role versus your identity. More significantly, if your identity is too locked into the role of lawyer, it keeps you from accessing the full range of internal skills or developmental capacities that you need in order to play the role of leader, which is actually significantly different than just day-to-day legal practice. So for lawyers whose jobs and careers have been deeply tied to reducing or eliminating risk, this sort of role and identity confusion can itself be at the root of keeping them from being able to engage professionally with agility. So, how do you begin to change? There are 4 mindset elements that I recommend that people begin to more deeply dive into in order to set yourself up to leave this confusion of role and identity behind, particularly if if the role that you have tied your identity to is one that associates your practice of law with aversion to and avoidance of risk. First of all, acknowledge that you have tied your role too tightly to your identity, and that the role that you've tied your identity too tightly to is one that is inconsistent with an agile mindset. Acknowledgement has to happen before anything else can occur. And although that can be very painful, particularly for those of us that are used to being at the top of the game of whatever sort of game it is that we're playing, it's very, very important. Number 2, commit to engaging in a growth mindset. A growth mindset, and again, in the supplemental materials, I have included a book recommendation that goes into the psychology of success and the mindsets tied to growth that anyone should look at. It's a groundbreaking, very famous piece of work by someone named Carol Dweck. But basically, the growth mindset is one sort of like a white belt in martial arts who is saying, I don't know anything about anything, or I don't know anything about what it is that I'm stepping into. I am open to learning and growing at all times, as opposed to, this is my job. I know what I'm doing. I know my skill sets. I have the skill sets I need. I don't need to push any further. Always being mindful of the fact that with leadership in particular, the amount to learn, particularly when it comes to mindset and soft skills, is pretty much endless. Engaging with actively a growth mindset is utterly essential. Once you engage in a growth mindset, by the way, you're going to be in a position where you can say to yourself, now I'm ready to adjust that personal narrative and have that narrative grow into something else. I'm ready to sever that link between role and identity and grow who I am as a matter of role, incorporating all of the elements of my identity, including the capacity to be agile. Then you want to document your commitment in writing. Every client that I have, when they make these sort of commitments, I ask them with a lot of force to put this stuff in writing and post it by your door, or post it on your refrigerator, or post it by your computer so you can see it everywhere. So it's not just something that you think, write down, and then forget 2 days later, but you really have it sink into who and what you are. Heck, I even have some of my clients record it and then play this sort of stuff over and over in their earphones when they're working out or when they're going to bed, because it's so important. And I do that because as our narratives shift and as our understanding of who and what we are shifts, it can be easy to want to backslide. And reinforcing it over and over and over again, whether visually or through audio or through other means, is immensely helpful in being able to make that growth mindset shift something that's permanent. And then finally, and sort of tied to this documentation, pull in an accountability partner, a coach, a mentor, a mastermind group member, if you're a part of a mastermind or if you want to join a mastermind, a trusted relative, or something, an automated system, in some cases can serve as an accountability partner, but something that will be there to be aware of the commitment that you've made and remind you when you're falling off track, but also let you know, oh, I have seen you engage in a manner that is less risk averse. Let's celebrate that for a minute. I feel it's important for you to know that. So someone that will give you the reinforcement as a human-to-human matter as you move more and more deeply into your mindset shift. So we've talked about mindset. That's important. But how do we make the great leap that gentleman is making from having a mindset shift into living, breathing, and being that agile leader that the whole world needs you to be? That is what we're going to talk about next. So, mindset, which involves, as we just mentioned, re-identification as to who and what you are within your narrative, is very pivotal. But it's not enough to actually build the skill of agility and then engage with it in real life. Everything that we've talked about so far is merely laying the foundation for the manifestation of your transformation. Of equal importance is developing specific habits and skill sets that support leadership agility, and then executing a plan to implement them. And before we execute that plan, of course, we would need to know what are the skills that we would want to develop that would form the foundation of that plan. And that's where I want us to talk for a few minutes about the role of skill development. In my observation, both in working with clients over the years And by the way, looking at my own life as a lawyer who had a sometimes rocky road to multiple executive level leadership positions, there are some skills that I've seen over and over that are worth exploring, that are things that don't just happen, but need to be affirmatively developed. And again, I cannot emphasize this enough. I do not put out any of these skill development planks as things that I am in any way superior to anyone watching this, with regards to. A lot of why I am so committed to giving seminars like this, and why I'm so grateful to Justia for giving me the opportunity to engage with you, is that it took me a lot of hard work, effort, and I made a lot of mistakes and went down all sorts of wayward paths on my journey to learn the things that I'm sharing with you. And nothing is more important to me than making the journey of other people easier. I truly care about other folks who've in the same sorts of shoes that I was in, having the skills that it took me so long to develop without as much work. And so that's the sort of place that I'm coming from in talking about these skill development areas. There's 5 of them, and the first is the ability to right size your assessment of the upsides and the downsides of decisions that are being made by you as a leader, or that the organization that you might be working for is making and is seeking your counsel about. And these upsides include things like financial upsides, of course, but they also include things like personal upsides and downsides, reputational upsides and downsides, morale upsides and downsides, professional upsides and downsides, like when it comes to your career and how that'll play out in the future. And then, making sure that they are, that the upsides are both fully examined by you. As lawyers, it can be very easy for us, for instance, to reactively get into a mode of, we don't want to take that course of action because it might lead to litigation. Yes, actions lead to litigation. But is that the whole story? Is it litigation that we're likely to win? Is it litigation that is worth having? Are the business objectives of the organization, or is your firm's growth such that, okay, litigation could happen, but it's worth a risk if you consider the upsides? When we focus as risk mitigators, which is what we are so often as attorneys, or risk eliminators, we can forget the quality of the upsides at all. Or we can downplay them because we're so overwhelmed by the risks that we see. And so really developing a skill of self-consciously saying, I'm going to give the upsides every single bit of weight that the downsides have, is a huge skill development area that many lawyers have to step into. And I cannot tell you, if you're not able to see the upsides, or if you are someone that may see that and acknowledge the upsides, but sees the downsides as worse than anything, you'll lose credibility as a lawyer and as an advisor and as a leader faster than anything. That's the fastest credibility loser I saw in my entire executive career when it came to hearing from lawyers. So it's an area that you may not need to develop, but if you are honest with yourself, and you do need to develop, it's worth investing some time and energy into. Number 2, appropriately assessing social expectations about what a lawyer is, or should say. So many times attorneys are, and this is only natural, we often go into the field because we've been sort of groomed to be lawyers our whole lives. We may have had fathers or mothers who were law professors, or parents or relatives that were lawyers. We may come from a family of lawyers, or like with me, I didn't come from a family of lawyers, but everyone since I was 5 said, Scott, you argue so much, you are going to be a lawyer. And you know what? I became a lawyer. And And because I became a lawyer, and as again, I fused my role with my identity, I began to think, well, this is how lawyers look, this is how lawyers act, this is how lawyers speak, and this is what lawyers focus on. It can come out in some funny ways, right? Like I had these orange dress shoes that I loved for a long time. I wouldn't wear them forever because lawyers didn't dress that way, but eventually I got bold and started to wear my orange dress shoes, and people loved them. But on a more serious level, it may also play out in terms of decision making. As a law firm owner, you may say, well, as a lawyer, I always am going to want to think about this and this and this first, even if your business needs require that you sort of drop these expectations about what a lawyer should think like. Or you may say, everyone is looking at me and asking for my advice as the general counsel here, so let me be a lawyer and give that lawyerly opinion. Really? If you are in a leadership position, it is a very rare situation in which someone will not value cogent, well thought out input about a subject beyond your very strict function when they are seeking your advice, particularly as a lawyer. And so I found that once I learned to break free and say, well, as a lawyer, I think XYZ, but these are other considerations that I'm seeing that haven't come up, people took me a lot more seriously, and I was able to lean, because I was thinking that way in order to speak that way, I was able to lean more and more and more into the agility-oriented mindset that was underlying the considerations that I was bringing to the table that were outside of my legal opinions. So what I'm saying again is, make sure that you are not letting your inputs into whatever leadership decisions either you're making or advising your client on be overly driven by what you think a lawyer should be or what you think other people think a lawyer should be. They probably will be very pleasantly surprised if you actually just say everything that's on your mind, whether or not a lawyer should say it or not. Finally, our third, catching and replacing head narratives that default to change resistance. In other words, the mindset stuff that we talked earlier and that you have acknowledged exists and that you presumably are beginning to work towards. Every now and then, that inner voice that we all have will creep out, and sometimes we don't even realize it. And a core skill set that is associated with making sure that the mindset shifts that we talked about earlier stay with you is understanding that you have an inner voice, but that the inner voice can be shut down. That we don't have to be driven by the inner monologue. You can, if you find yourself saying, well, but litigation will happen, or but this contractual dispute might occur, or all these sorts of things. Say to yourself, okay, this is that old default voice that is the result of the confusion of role and identity. Now I have the power to tell that voice, you've said your little piece, now go to the back room, sit in a corner like you need to, and let my full voice speak. And I'm sort of making light about it, but I have found both within myself and within clients that I've worked with that the minute you say to yourself, I'm going to shift my mindset and the way I'm thinking, the inner voice that represents what you were, what you're trying to move away from, begins to bark extra loud and relentlessly. And people want, and I also myself wanted to just give up. But that barking, that resurgence of the risk-averse, the anti-agility voice coming out really is a sign that you're moving in the right direction. It's like a death rattle. And if you persist in learning how to catch that inner voice, recognizing it as a voice that can be put aside, you are going to be able to move more and more into a place where agility gradually replaces it as a default. But recognizing and getting rid of the inner voice is a skill itself that many people do not have. They certainly didn't teach me about it in law school, I'll tell you that. By the way, a bonus little tip here, don't ever judge yourself for having that inner voice. That's part of being human. Focus on the change itself. The fourth of the agility-related skill development areas that you would likely want to focus on is maintaining clarity, focus, and action on what your organization and those that it serves need above and beyond anything that might be driven by your own needs. So, what do I mean by that? a lot of times, keeping it real, we've all been there. There are lawyers who will say, I really recommend that we do not take this action because, and then they give a reason that's a pretext, but is ultimately about who and what they are inside. Again, I'm going to use litigation as an example. We should not make this decision because it will bring about a lawsuit. Okay. Now, what is that concern really addressing? Or more properly, who is that concern really addressing? Is the client concerned about the lawsuit? Is the lawsuit defensible? And again, is this an area, for instance, of first impression where maybe the client wants to actually have this litigation so they can have so they can have clarity in one way or the other, or there may be a whole host of other things. In this example, the driver behind this recommendation could be, I don't want to have to deal with a trial. Right? I don't want to have my entire staff's life stopped so that we can do document discovery and coordinate with outside counsel and go to deposition, all this, and arrange all this sort of stuff and put these holds on, all that sort of stuff, right? That's an example of where things like convenience or stability might be driving the lens through which you assess upsides versus downsides that is not necessarily accurate. Similarly, a lot of times the recommendations we make as leaders when we are what may keep us from being agile when it comes to those recommendations or the decisions that we make are governed by what we think our organization or client wants or what we think that they should want, even if that's not what they actually want. Right. So when I worked for government, occasionally I would have lawyers say things like, well, I think that your agency, when I was working in-house within agencies, I think your agency should want XYZ. Okay, that's nice that you think that, but that's not actually what I think. And there are times when I said the reverse. I think that you should want, and they would be like, again, that's nice, Scott, how cute, but we decide what we want, not you. And so, right, that's a classic case of we're arguing for something based on what we perceive their needs as being, or what we think their needs should be, doesn't necessarily align with what their needs actually are, or what the needs of their customers, if it's an organization or a nonprofit or something like that, really want. And so the antidote to that is always saying what's really driving me to make a recommendation or a decision that is not rooted in agility, particularly if other people around me are pushing for me to be more agile. Is it that I have a psychological need that's driving my recommendation or my decision? Is it an idea that I have about what my clients or my organization wants that isn't necessarily true? Or is it a genuine, relentless focus with clarity on what your organization and its clients, or what your clients actually need are? Right? Is that focus, without all this other stuff aside, considering as a very serious matter, I would almost say as at least one of the top priorities, what their needs are, and not what we think that they should be, or not what we've decided that it ought to be, or not our needs. So focusing on the organization and those it serves as the guiding light for your decision will help a lot with agility, because then you're going to be able to see and be able to open yourself to the entire landscape within which they're operating, which suddenly may make those upsides that you're looking at and assessing differently a lot more clear. And they may also right-size some of the downsides. Then finally, the last agility-related skill development area for attorneys to focus on is the identification of and management of fear. Risk aversion, the lack of agility, at its root, almost always has some level of fear. In some cases, it can even border on panic. Sometimes fear and panic are justified, but many times they're not. Fear, and this is again an actual skill, is just an emotion. And like that head talk that we talked about a little earlier, it can be crumpled up like a piece of paper and thrown into the trash. Most of us did not receive as part of our legal training, and maybe not even as part of our undergrad training, we're not taught tools that allow us to identify what these emotions are and how we can effectively and habitually manage them. If anything, particularly as a lawyer, we are given extraordinary intellectual and rationalization tools. Otherwise, we wouldn't be lawyers in the first place. We would never made it through law school and passed the bar, right? But those rational thinking skills can be used to cover up and justify decisions or recommendations that are ultimately driven by emotion. So being able to see fear for what it is and separate that from our rationalization skills, and then developing the discipline with practice and the internal openness to shifting your relationship with fear is an important, not easily developable, but very much doable skill development area that I recommend that any lawyer looking to become an agile leader engage with. So once you know the skills that you have, how do you build it into a plan? First of all, you want to go through those 5 skills that I mentioned earlier and identify the ones that you need to develop. And if there are any additional ones that you come across through your own self-exploration or your work with whomever it is that you're working with, you want to actually just list them. Then you want to briefly, next to that list, and I recommend just doing it on a regular spreadsheet if you're not that technologically savvy, or even if you are, just briefly describe why that particular skill of those 5 or any others is so important to your success as a lawyer leader. So you are invested in the skill development that is being discussed in that portion of the plan. In other words, for instance, that skill development will help increase the value of your advice and your credibility as a member of your leadership team. It will help your firm retain clients because they don't see your firm as constantly just telling them no. Or it will help you boost your firm's bottom line because you are able to attract more clients, and even as less are leaving. And then you want to identify the level of difficulty that particular area of skill development might be for you. So it might be that calming that internal voice is a 1 to 5. We'll say 1 to 5 is the 5 is the highest level of difficulty. 1 is the lowest level of difficulty. That might be the highest level. The easiest one might be simply, overcoming fear. That might be something that's just naturally easy for you. Once you have identified the difficulty level, then you want to list the order of the skills as a leadership and professional development priority. And you want to start your skill development by looking at, of those 5 or more skills that are the easiest for you to build, but at the same time have the highest level of impact. You don't necessarily want to start with the one that's easiest if it has a nominal impact, and you don't want to start at the one that's hardest if it has a nominal impact. You want to start at the one that is as easy as possible for you to learn, but has the highest level of impact. And then you want to list out 3 to 5 concrete action steps that you can take to begin building these skills. And I would recommend that you be creative about it. You might want to include, again, getting coaching on that particular issue, or taking a class on leadership that focuses on that issue, or a mindset class, or maybe community organizations or library organizations you can join. There may be reading that you do. I regularly read, by the way. I have a syllabus that I put together every year that I plow through every morning as a matter of my daily reading. It includes a lot of the things that I've talked about that I want to keep myself fresh and sharp on. It could be joining peer accountability or support groups. It could be even creating WhatsApp sessions with friends. There's all sorts of ways that you could begin to actually prioritize and then take those concrete steps and identify what those concrete steps are. And then finally, you want to, in your plan, identify success markers. How will you know that you have succeeded in developing that skill? It might be that you tell someone who's close to you, every time you have heard me make decisions based on agility 3 times, or if you haven't heard me be all reactive against change for 3 months, you tell me, right? It could be that sort of thing that provides you some sort of hard metric to shoot towards and for you to know that you are succeeding with regards to. And then I would also include start dates. Stagger them. You don't want to start your skill development on all 5 things on the same day. And then you want to also make sure that you propose some staggered dates that you want to make sure that you note the dates that you actually did commence them. So you might have said, I want to start really working on catching that inner voice around around my identity and around risk in March, but for whatever reason you can't. Maybe your birthday celebration went on for too long. Okay. Note when you actually did start it. And then you want to make sure that your plan includes the accountability systems that we talked about earlier. So whatever accountability system is, you want to make sure that you actually write that down and what it looks like, and then note the tools and the apps that you use to actually help. With that in place, you're well on your way to becoming more adaptable and agile. However, as I mentioned earlier, just because we want to become more agile doesn't mean we want to run up, hug, and kiss it without reservation. Because as I'm sure all of you are thinking, Scott, there are times in which we can just adapt ourselves right off a cliff. And that's not what I'm advocating here. And so how can we begin to think about the limits of agility, and what is a framework within which we can assess whether the tendency that we have developed to become agile is actually taking it too far? When is the right time for agility? First of all, as we talked about earlier, we don't want, although we want to focus on what our clients' interests are and what the organizational missions are, we also need to understand that their needs are not necessarily the same as things that are sort of tertiary. In other words, what I'm saying is when you think about what your clients' needs are or what the larger organizational needs are, think about them from a holistic and mission perspective, or what the larger objectives for your clients are. You don't want to, for instance, mix up. You don't want things like administrative convenience for your clients or for your organization to be driving your perception of what the client needs are. That's a classic case of the tail wagging the dog. You don't want personal preferences that members of the leadership team or that you yourself might have with regard to the decision to be driving your decision about whether to be agile or not. Again, this goes back to really focusing on what your organization or those it serves have as true, deep mission or larger strategic goals and needs, not any sort of side stuff. So with that in mind, then you also want to, because you are focusing on the bigger picture and not things like, I don't know, will IT have a hissy fit about this? Well, IT can have a hissy fit about that, and that's their issue, not yours. But you can think about, is the decision comporting with the organization's larger purpose and values? Is the decision comporting with the organization's or its constituents' core purpose and values? So, for instance, if someone is running a yoga mat company and there is a decision to go into, I don't know, baby stroller manufacturing, right? Well, okay, there may be a whole host of reasons, and there may be some upsides to that. And the client itself may really, really think that that's the best decision, but is it comporting with their overall mission? If their overall mission, for instance, is to better the yoga experience for people everywhere, And by doing that through its area of expertise, which is in yoga-related products, maybe the baby strollers aren't as relevant. When it comes to values, or think about and process the decision as to whether you want to be agile or not based on whether that change that you are considering really is aligned with what you, if you're the leader of your company, are saying that your company's values are, or what your organization itself is saying its values are. So an example of that might be if you're saying that your organizational value is to provide the best criminal defense and the most personalized boutique level criminal defense, and that is what you stand for, and that is the value that you will not compromise on. Well, then if a decision comes to bring about some sort of streamlined criminal defense process that is less personal, less high touch, is that really comporting with your values when it comes to being agile, or will it ultimately hurt the organization because of that misalignment? Then finally, is there any ethical compromise built into the decision that you're about to make? This one kind of goes without saying, but at the same time, you can never say it, especially are any of your ethical obligations as an attorney put at risk by you making a decision that is rooted in a commitment to levels of agility? You cannot ever do that, because no matter what, as we all know, we still have our license, and making decisions that are contrary to the ethics that we've committed to when we became attorneys is paramount above and beyond any of these other things. And so I have noted, and there's a lot more detail about this in the supplemental materials, some ethical considerations. All of these ethical considerations are based on the ABA's model rules. As you all know, individual jurisdictions and even some individual legal functions may have different or expanded levels of ethical accountability and ethical responsibility attached to them. But I'm just going to quickly go through them right now. For instance, is your proposed action one that conflicts with your duty to behave as a competent attorney would? If so, you may be at risk of violating Rule 1.1 of the ethical canons related to competence. Similarly, you don't want to be so agile and so rapid in your decision-making process that either the conflict of interest requirements or the confidentiality requirements that attach to our practice as lawyers are in any way whatsoever compromised. We don't want to embrace risk that includes illegal or otherwise immoral or dishonest behavior, even if that suits business needs. And then we don't want to go into Rule 5.1 and a corollary in Rule 5.3. We don't want to be in a position where we're even implicitly authorizing or letting go ethically compromised behaviors by attorneys or non-attorneys on our staff. So because we're almost out of time and I'm going to stay a couple minutes late to answer questions, let's talk quickly about what key takeaways are. First of all, cautious and risk-averse approaches that can lead to success in law can actually hinder you when it comes to being a leader, whether of your own firm or within a non-legal organization. This can present major challenges that can put your career at risk because you're not seen as an effective or credible leader. Acknowledging and understanding this conundrum allows you to change your professional narrative, embrace a growth mindset, and then begin to think about accountability systems so that mindset shift can actually be consistent. Mindset shift is only meaningful if it's backed up by action, and that is implemented via a formal action plan. The formal action plan, the planks of which we discussed earlier, are made up of the skill development areas that may include the 5 that I outlined that are very frequently seen within lawyers, and you want to make sure that you prioritize those, put action steps in place, and again, have accountability systems as well as success metrics built into that plan. And then as a bonus, and finally, I don't want to forget, we want to make sure that we are always mindful of the fact that agility has its limits, and we want to consider things like ethics or whether the decisions that we make are really best for the clients that we serve or those that they exist to serve or that our organizations serve when we decide whether we want to be agile or not. Never forget the ethical canons that I mentioned earlier and that are in the supplemental materials. By the way, as a bonus, if you realize that you have truly begun to embrace yourself and view yourself and act differently as a leader and are becoming super agile, one other thing that you can do is just reach out to me. connect with me and say, Scott, I went to that Justia seminar that you had, and I've changed, and I want to tell you about it. I love connecting with people. I love celebrating success. I'm a big believer that every action plan should include some sort of success celebration. And if you don't know anyone who will celebrate your success for you, or if you want an extra person to celebrate you, I strongly urge that you reach out to me. And how do you do that, you might ask? Well, conveniently, my information is both in your supplemental materials and right here. I am on LinkedIn. To a lesser degree, I'm on Instagram, and my handle is there. I also have a whole YouTube page that is full of videos and podcast interviews that relate to legal leadership and professional transformation into leadership. And I would love it if you followed me. So my YouTube handle is there, as is a link via the QR code. And with that, I will turn it back over to Nina for questions, but I will say, as Nina always reminds me of my catchphrase, I want your future to be epic.
Thank you, Scott. So as you mentioned, we are able to take any audience questions that we have. So if you have any questions for Scott, please feel free to submit them through that Q&A button in the control panel at the bottom of your screen. I'll wait for a few questions to come in and we can take them. All right, perfect. It looks like we've got a couple. So our first question is, how can I balance risk aversion with the need for agility or adaptability while I'm not going to sacrifice my ethical responsibilities as well?
Yeah, look, I will be candid. This is not easy stuff. And that's why good leaders are so hard to come by. First of all, the initial thing that I would just hammer in is, when it comes to thinking about agility, think about their actual needs first, or your organization, if you're in a non-legal organization, those strategic objectives and the mission and the values. So always be familiar with the organization that you work for, what its core mission and its core value statement say. If it's your organization, it's imperative, just as a matter of leadership and business growth, to understand what your mission and your values are, just simply as a matter of differentiation from other businesses, but as your North Star. And then when it comes to that decision, a lot of times what I do literally is I will pull out those ethical canons, read them, especially the ones that I mentioned there. And that's part of why I wanted you to have these supplemental materials, so you would have easy access to some key ones and say, am I violating any of these in any way? And you sort of use it as a formula, but understanding that particularly the ethical canons, they outweigh everything else. Don't ever make a leadership decision that will put your license at risk unless you just don't care about your license. But if so, you shouldn't be a lawyer at all. To be harsh.
Oh, no, it's true. So this is also related to kind of risk aversion. So what are some signs that I have risk averse tendencies and that they may be actually limiting my effectiveness as a leader?
What a great question. First of all, if you are working for a larger organization and you find yourself not on a leadership track. Now, I'm going to talk about leadership using a very specific definition of it here. There's leadership, and then there's management, and there's supervision. Many times, people who are risk averse in the legal profession can make it up to those lower levels of supervisory and managerial authority, because they have the ability, due to that very set of skills that leads to risk aversion, to be able to appropriately guide those underneath them. Where you will see that you may have this problem is if you begin to observe that the supervisors that you work for, or the leadership above that, aren't viewing you seriously in terms of further escalation down the road. Now, agility may not be, there are maybe other reasons for that, but agility or lack of agility, or a lack of alignment with the ability to shift, is a big reason. And at that point, it's worth exploring it. Also, if inside, when it comes to a decision, the very first thing that you say to yourself is, we shouldn't because, or the danger is, or the risk is, I would begin to say to myself, am I overly risk averse? And if you find yourself stopping with, the danger of this is, okay, so I won't do it, as opposed to the danger is, but the upsides are blah, 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 then you almost certainly have risk aversion as a problem. So those are three things that you can look at, or three questions that you can ask yourself that may begin to get you down that road. Is all this helpful? I hope so. Let me know if it isn't, folks. Ask me in more detail.
We have time for a few more questions, so I'll ask you about three more. Next question is, how can I cultivate a culture of adaptability with my team or firm while still maintaining high professional standards?
I love that question. First of all, the fact that you are asking it says to me that you are on your road to being, if not there already, an agile leader. Because what that's doing is you're saying, I'm willing to take a step as a leader within an organization that is risky. Anytime you are about to shape culture within your organization, even if it's within your own pocket, you're taking a risk. Good for you for thinking that way. I just had to get that out. Secondly, what you want to do above and beyond all else, two things. First of all, make sure that if your staff comes to you from either a purely risk averse perspective, in other words, every time it's the lawyers or whoever under you is like, no, 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 or we can't, and you're not hearing any nuanced or well-rounded consideration of upsides, stopping and asking, what are the upsides of this action and what is the real level of risk vis-a-vis our clients or those that our organization serves, and making sure that they answer that and cultivating that answer. When they answer that, if they answer it in a way that moves this, demonstrating to you a greater degree of agility, praise them to death. You might even want to include something like that in their tasks and standards. Are they thinking in a nuanced, wide-ranging fashion about problems and ranking them accordingly? And then number two, if people come to you with ideas that are kooky or that might seem like they're a little bit off, nonetheless, praise, praise, praise. You might say, I love it. We can't do that because of these other considerations, but good for you for coming to me. Keep it coming. I want to hear more. People will eat that up like candy, and you need that. That encourages agility. Finally, if you are a risk-averse boss and you know that you have that tendency and you're trying to change it, you want your staff to build that culture, nothing's wrong. In fact, there's a lot right with being transparent, saying, I have an issue with risk aversion. I don't always assess the upsides, or I get driven by fear, or the convenience to us is what drives my decision making. Catch me on this. Well, people will catch you on this, especially if you reward them for it. But then they'll also, because people mimic the leaders that they're under, they'll begin to do that themselves.
Awesome. Thank you for that insight,
Thank
Scott.
you.
Our next question is, what methods can I use to evaluate whether my leadership has become too rigid and not adaptable enough?
Yeah, so the most common assessment type that people have is institutional, right? And it's usually through the form of a 360-degree review. You may not be able to do that, but candidly, what I did when I was concerned about that, as well as some other leadership areas that I had, is I did my own little 360-degree review. I put together a series of questions about my leadership style, including, I believe, in this case, agility, and some other things. And I literally distributed them to key staff members, both direct reports, 2 or 3 levels underneath me, my core colleagues, and actually to some people that were higher up than me. And I told them, you can respond anonymously or you can respond. My staff, they were all afraid. They were all going to, suck up to me. And I told them, A, you'll be rewarded if you don't. I want the truth. But then I had some of the bolder ones give me the feedback first, and then after I praised them and thanked them and committed to making a change, they all went back and told everyone, oh, he didn't bite my head off. Oh, I'm in his good graces now. And then everyone decided they were going to be honest. So that's the way to do that. You just need to, once you get that feedback, to assess it and say to everyone, to make a public commitment, I'm going to change, and I ask you to help me and let me know if I am changing or not. And then again, hold people to that in a way that's positive. It's not easy, but don't we all want to be the best that we can be? And that's what this is all about.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for answering those questions and just giving us the insight about the importance of adaptability and strategies to get there when you're a leader in a law firm. So we really appreciate it. I do want to go ahead and just wrap us up for today. So thank you all so much for joining us for another Justia webinar. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning of today's presentation, for all the lawyers here today, we like to remind you about the benefits of joining our Justia Connect Pro membership. membership. With the Pro membership, you get access to a myriad of things to help boost your practice. One of them being the AI-powered Justia chat to help you get even more leads. You also get access to an enhanced profile in the Justia Lawyer directory with a badge, the ability to earn CLE credits for select on-demand and live webinars, a $200 credit to put towards Justia marketing solutions, and more. So if you'd like to learn more or upgrade today, you can go to pro.justia.com. Thank you all so much for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy it, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel for more videos on law practice and legal marketing. See you in our next video.